That night, in a small auditorium in Austin, Texas, hundreds of locals gathered to listen to Elon Musk. Not a talk about rockets, electric cars, or artificial intelligence. Today, the powerful man stood in the middle of a simple room where yellow lights softly illuminated eager faces. The soft scraping of chairs against the floor mingled with the murmur of conversation. On stage, Musk was still a familiar image with a dark suit and bright, determined eyes. But tonight, something was different. He looked more thoughtful, more attentive, as if waiting for something really important to happen. And then, in the middle of the row, a small figure sat silently. Alice, an 8-year-old girl, clutched her grandmother's old Bible. It was faded with time, the pages frayed from being flipped through too many times. Today, she had not come here to ask for an autograph, nor to ask about which planet Musk wanted to conquer next. She had a question she'd been pondering for weeks, writing and rewriting in a small notebook, whispering to her mother before bed. A question that even grown-ups might hesitate to ask. And when Elon Musk spoke, opening the question and answer session with the audience, Alice took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding, her little hands gripping the book so tightly that her fingers turned white. Then, in a moment when the hall was still buzzing, she stood up. A silence fell as a clear but determined voice rang out. "Mr. Musk, what does God mean to you?" At that moment, the room stopped. All eyes turned to her. The whispers died away. No one laughed, no one spoke. Only Elon Musk stood there, looking at Alice, and there was a thoughtful look in the billionaire's eyes, as if he had never really thought about the answer himself. Elon Musk stood there, silent. His eyes swept over Alice, over the old book she was clutching tightly to her chest. In that moment, he was no longer a powerful businessman, nor a great mind of the era. He was just a human being, facing a question that he had been pondering for a long time. Taking a deep breath, Musk began to tell. "When I was your age, Alice, I did not have a peaceful childhood." He looked into the distance, as if memories from the old days were flooding back. "I grew up in South Africa. It was not an easy place to live, especially for a sensitive and bookish child like me. I did not have many friends. I was often bullied at school, sometimes beaten so much that I could not stand up." The hall was silent. No one expected that a strong person like Elon Musk had such a past. "My parents divorced when I was a kid. I lived with my dad, a very strict and unpredictable man. He was a genius, but also very cold. I never felt loved in that house." Musk paused. No one spoke, but everyone could hear the pain in his voice. "I spent a lot of time alone. I read books, lots of books. I got lost in the world of science fiction, of outer space, of stories about people who changed the world. Books were the only place I felt safe." He looked at Alice. She was still listening, unblinking. "There were nights when I lay in my room wondering, why is life so unfair? Why can't I have a happy family like other kids? I used to think that if there was a God, he would have abandoned me." He didn't dare ask anyone. He watched, listened, but no one gave him a satisfactory answer. People believed in God as a matter of course, but for Musk, the world did not operate according to the ambiguities. Science explained everything, from the formation of the universe to the collapse of a star, but no one could explain God with formulas or laws. As he grew older, he gradually moved away from religious rituals. What he believed in was no longer the supernatural, but human intelligence, the progress of science and technology. He was fascinated by physical theories, the great works of mankind, believing that they were the key to understanding the world. But even so, during those years, there were moments when skepticism arose, especially when he faced loss and failure. As a young man, he witnessed people around him fall before adversity. There are friends who cannot escape their own pain. There are dreams that collapse before they can take shape. And then, in those uncertain moments, he wonders, are we really alone, or is there something bigger running this world? However, those are just fleeting thoughts, until he really faces the biggest challenge of his life, the moment when everything almost collapses. Tesla was once on the brink of bankruptcy. SpaceX failed again and again, the relentless efforts, the increasingly depleted investment funds. There were times when he asked himself, am I chasing an impossible dream? Standing in the middle of the hall, Elon Musk paused for a moment, his eyes flashing with indescribable sadness. The past appeared in his mind like a slow-motion film. Alice was still listening, her hands loosening on the book, but her eyes still did not leave Musk. The girl seemed to be trying to process what he had just said, and in that moment, Musk realized that he had not really finished the story. There was something more important that he had not mentioned, something that had truly changed the way he viewed faith, and that was when he remembered Fred. Fred was not a businessman, not an engineer, nor a tech genius. He was Musk's best friend, a man with a warm heart and a gentle smile, but life did not give him luck. Fred had simple dreams, not dreams of conquering the universe or changing humanity. But he struggled with his own pain, and in the end, he collapsed before them. Fred died so young. When he received the news, Musk could not believe it. Why did someone like Fred, so kind, so full of potential, not get a second chance? Why did the world continue to operate as if nothing had happened? For the first time in his life, he felt angry at God, if there really was a God. He felt betrayed, as if everything he had believed in had become meaningless. If there was a higher power, why did he let this happen? For years after that, I buried myself in work, in numbers, in grand plans. I created companies that would change the world, but deep down, I was running away. Running away from questions that had no answers. But then, one night, in the middle of all this work, I dreamed of Fred. Fred wasn't blaming, wasn't angry, wasn't sad. He just stood there, smiling as gently as ever. Then, in a voice Musk hadn't heard in years, Fred said, "Don't be angry anymore, Musk. You still have work to do." I woke up with a start. I couldn't understand it. The dream was unlike any I'd ever had before. It was so clear, so real, as if Fred had actually been there. I sat up, clutching the covers with both hands, and wondered, is this a dream, or is it really Fred? I didn't know. I can't explain it with science, logic, or any formula. But for the first time in years, I felt something I had never felt before. Relief. I realized that maybe not everything in life needs to be understood. Some things are not meant to be analyzed, but believed in. Some losses are not meant to break us, but to remind us to keep going. Fred was gone, but I realized that he was never really gone. Those last words in my dream weren't just random. They were a message, a reminder that I still had a journey ahead of me, that I couldn't let the pain bind me forever. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt different. I didn't feel as angry as before. I no longer searched for answers to questions that would probably never be satisfactorily answered. I don't know if God exists, but I do know one thing. There are things beyond human understanding, and that doesn't mean they aren't real. From that day on, I looked at faith differently. Not as blind faith, not as empty scriptures, but as a reminder that we are never truly alone. There are questions that will never have absolute answers, but sometimes the answers are less important than the fact that we keep going. The applause died down, but the atmosphere in the hall was still filled with a strange feeling. No one stood up, no one spoke. They were not simply spectators who had come here to hear Elon Musk talk about technology or the future. Now, they were part of a moment they would probably never forget. Elon Musk stood there, his eyes glancing over to Alice. She was still clutching her grandmother's old book, but her expression was no longer as shy as before. She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling under the ceiling light. Musk stepped down from the podium. No one knew what he was going to do, but everyone was watching his every move. He walked slowly toward Alice, crouching down to her level. "Your name is Alice, right?" Musk asked, his voice low but gentle. The girl nodded slightly. "You are very brave," he said, his eyes full of sincerity. "You know, sometimes the hardest questions don't come from grown-ups, but from the purest souls." Alice squeezed the book in her hand, hesitantly saying, "My grandmother used to say, important questions always have answers. It's just that sometimes we're not ready to see them." Musk smiled. "My grandmother is very wise." A voice suddenly rang out from the audience. A middle-aged man with a haggard face spoke, his voice trembling but full of emotion. "Mr. Musk, I lost my faith. I was angry with God. I felt abandoned. Does God ever really listen to us?" The room held its breath. Musk looked at the man, then at Alice. He took a deep breath as if considering each word he was about to say. "I can't say I know for sure," he said slowly. "But I believe that God, or whatever we call the higher power, is always present in its own way. We don't always see it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist." The man nodded, as if he had just found something he had long lost. Alice spoke suddenly, her voice small but clear. "My grandmother used to say that faith is like planting a seed. You can't see it grow right away, but if you're patient, one day it will bloom." Musk looked at her, a rare softness in his eyes. "You're right," he said softly. "Faith isn't always obvious. But sometimes it's the little moments like this that help us see it." The older woman sitting nearby burst into tears. "I lost my husband last year," she said, her voice shaking. "I stopped praying after that. I thought maybe God had forgotten me." Musk stepped closer, his voice quiet. "I don't think God ever forgets anyone. Sometimes he just waits for us to be ready to find him again." An eerie silence filled the room, but it wasn't an oppressive silence. It was the silence of people who have just found something they didn't know they needed. Musk turned to Alice. He held out his hand. She hesitated for a second, then placed her small hand in his. A gentle squeeze, not too tight, not too long, but enough to say it all. Then she turned back to her mother. Before leaving the hall, Alice turned back to look at Musk one last time. He was still standing there, watching her. No longer the man of numbers, spaceships, or world-class projects. Just a human being. A human being searching for meaning, just like everyone else in this room. The doors to the auditorium opened, and the light of the Texas night sky flooded in. Alice stepped outside, taking a deep breath. And somewhere in the vast universe, her grandmother was probably smiling too.